strengthen a little bit. Conditions were a touch more conducive for some development as it pulled out of the Bahamas. I've been seeing some strengthening. It may strengthen a little bit more briefly as it moves closer to Bermuda. And I want to zoom down into Bermuda. We track storms start to finish, and that's what we'll do. But you can see the core of this a little better organized right in through here. Winds right now at 105 miles per hour, so that's about 165 kilometers an hour.
At 140 miles per hour, Hurricane Melissa barrels toward Florida's Gulf Coast, its eye just 500 miles out, powered by the hottest Gulf waters on record. This is the moment the governor sounded the alarm for all 67 counties, declaring a full state of emergency as storm trackers reveal near certainty of a catastrophic direct hit on Tampa Bay. Melissa's rapid intensification has stunned even veteran forecasters, and with storm surge forecasts reaching unspeakable heights, millions now face the unthinkable. Why has Florida's governor gone into visible panic mode? And what makes this storm different from anything in a century? We start at the critical moment when every second began to matter. Drop-sonde data from NOAA's Hurricane Hunter aircraft delivered the first hard evidence that Hurricane Melissa had crossed a dangerous threshold. Inside the eye, pilots recorded a central pressure of 938 millibars, an unmistakable sign of a storm at the peak of its power. The flight deck's instruments tracked a steady drop hour by hour, confirming what satellite loops already hinted. The storm was strengthening faster than any late-season hurricane in recent memory. Pressure readings like these aren't just numbers. In the world of hurricane science, every millibar lost means a tighter, more violent vortex. At 938 millibars, Melissa's winds had accelerated to 140 miles per hour, placing it firmly in Category 4 territory. That kind of pressure-to-wind relationship is a textbook case of the hurricane heat engine in overdrive, fueled by sea surface temperatures ranging from 85 to 87 degrees Fahrenheit across the Gulf. For late October, those are record-breaking waters, providing the extra energy needed for rapid intensification even as the season's supposed to be winding down. The storm's size was just as alarming as its strength. Hurricane-force winds spread outward 80 miles from Melissa's center, while tropical storm winds stretched 200 miles in every direction. That means nearly the entire width of the Florida peninsula could feel damaging gusts, even far from the eye. For meteorologists, this broad wind field is a warning sign. The bigger the storm, the more water it can push ashore, and the more infrastructure it can threaten at once. Pilots flying through the eye wall described turbulence so severe that cockpit alarms sounded nearly non-stop. Onboard sensors tracked updrafts and downdrafts swinging by 30 knots in seconds. Each pass through the eye delivered new evidence that the hurricane's internal dynamics were still accelerating. The 938 millibar reading wasn't a fluke. It was part of a pattern. The storm's core was tightening, the pressure was falling, and the wind field was expanding. All of these metrics, central pressure, wind radii, sea surface temperature, pointed to the same conclusion. Melissa was not just another hurricane. It was a heat-driven engine with the physical potential to outstrip even Florida's toughest building codes. With pressure dropping and the Gulf's warmth still feeding its core, the danger wasn't abstract. It was measured, mapped, and confirmed in real time by the very people flying into the storm. Governor Ron DeSantis stepped to the podium inside the State Emergency Operations Center, surrounded by a wall of maps and blinking screens. The clock on the wall read 9:14 a.m. As the latest National Hurricane Center cone showed Melissa's eye locked on Tampa Bay, the governor issued a statewide emergency order for all 67 counties. His voice was measured, but the message was unmistakable. We are facing a rapidly intensifying hurricane with the potential for catastrophic impact. All Floridians must take this threat seriously. The order triggered the full activation of emergency management teams from Pensacola to Key West, opening the way for mandatory evacuations, supply convoys, and the mobilization of the National Guard. Within minutes, alerts flashed across cell phones and local news tickers. The state's 48 to 72-hour window before expected landfall left little margin for hesitation. Counties along the Gulf Coast, especially those inside the projected impact zone, began issuing their own evacuation orders for coastal zones A and B. That meant more than 2.5 million people were now under direct orders to leave their homes. Voluntary evacuations for zones C and D added another million to the exodus. The National Weather Service in Tampa issued a stark bulletin, quoting surge models that showed the possibility of 15 to 20 feet of water inundating Pinellas County. Their warning cut through the morning chatter. Storm surge at these levels is unsurvivable above the ground floor. If you are in a mandatory evacuation zone, you must leave. On television, a clip of the governor's press conference played on a loop. He called for calm, but didn't sugarcoat the risk. We've seen the latest dropsonde data. We've seen the pressure fall. The storm is not weakening. If you are in the path, you need to act now. The National Hurricane Center's cone, updated with each new satellite pass, showed the eye of Melissa just 500 miles offshore and closing in at 12 miles per hour. Meteorologists explained that with each hour, the window for safe evacuation narrowed. The expanding wind field meant that even inland counties could face damaging gusts and flash flooding. In the hours after the emergency order, county officials scrambled to open shelters, coordinate with hospitals, and set up transportation for those without cars. Statewide, the message was clear. This was not a drill. The science had spoken, and now the entire system, political, logistical, and personal, was shifting into high gear in the face of a storm that left no time for doubt. A century ago, Tampa Bay was a quiet stretch of coastline dotted with fishing villages and citrus groves. In 1921, when the last major hurricane struck, fewer than 10,000 people lived in the entire region. Most homes were wooden, raised on blocks, and scattered far from the water's edge. The surge that swept across Pinellas and Hillsborough counties back then carved new inlets and flooded farmland, but there were no high-rises, no condo towers, and no billion-dollar neighborhoods at risk. Today, that same coastline is home to more than 3.2 million people. Over the decades, the population has multiplied by more than 300 times, filling in every inch of land from the barrier islands to the inland suburbs. The waterfront is now lined with luxury condos, sprawling subdivisions, and some of the most valuable real estate in the country. Bayfront parks, glass office towers, and marinas have replaced the old citrus groves. Every year, new arrivals add pressure to a region already bursting at the seams. The physical landscape has changed too. Since 1950, sea levels along Florida's Gulf Coast have risen by 8 inches, according to NOAA tide gauges. That may not sound like much, but for low-lying neighborhoods built at or near the waterline, it's enough to tip the balance between a close call and a disaster. Streets that once stayed dry during storms now flood with even moderate high tides. Drainage systems, designed for the past, can't keep up with the new normal. Historians point to the 1921 hurricane as a warning from a different era, a time when the bay's population was small and the risks were easier to manage. Today, the stakes are measured not only in lives, but in trillions of dollars of built assets. The Tampa Bay metro area has become one of the most exposed coastal communities in North America, with nearly every square mile of waterfront now developed and insured. This rapid growth, combined with relentless sea level rise, has created a situation where even a single storm could threaten more people and property than any hurricane in Florida's recorded history. The region's transformation from rural outpost to urban powerhouse means that the next major hurricane won't just be a test of weather science, it will be a test of how much risk a modern city can tolerate when nature pushes back. Across the Tampa Bay region, the value of what stands in harm's way is staggering. More than $3 trillion in property, spanning luxury high-rises, waterfront homes, marinas, and commercial centers, sits exposed on the parcel maps, layered from the barrier islands to the outer suburbs. This isn't just a number on a spreadsheet. It's a mosaic of neighborhoods, schools, hospitals, and businesses, all woven into one of the country's fastest-growing coastal economies. In places like Pinellas, Hillsborough, Manatee, and Sarasota counties, the density of high-value assets rivals that of any major American city. A single square mile along the bayfront can contain hundreds of millions in insured real estate. The transformation from sleepy fishing towns to a metropolis of 3.2 million has concentrated more wealth and infrastructure into this slice of Florida than ever before. Parcel overlays reveal just how much is at stake. Waterfront towers in downtown Tampa and St. Petersburg each carry price tags in the tens of millions for a single building. Sprawling subdivisions stretch inland, with thousands of homes valued at $400,000 or more. Commercial zones, shopping centers, and office parks fill in the gaps. At the top end, luxury condos on Beach Drive and Harbor Island list for $2 to $5 million apiece, their ground floors now sitting in the projected path of a 15 to 20-foot surge. But the threat isn't just about today's storm. Over the past decade, climate researchers have tracked a sharp rise in the frequency of major hurricanes making landfall in Florida. Where once a generation might pass between direct hits, models now suggest the state could face a hurricane of this magnitude every 1 to 2 years. Sea level rise, already up 8 inches since 1950, has quietly raised the baseline for disaster, making each new storm more dangerous than the last. As Hurricane Melissa closes in, the financial stakes are clear. This is a test not just of emergency response, but of how much risk Florida's coastal boom has built into its future. Every parcel at risk is mapped, valued, and accounted for. And with each new hurricane season, the odds of another multi-billion-dollar disaster only grow. Mandatory evacuation orders for zones A and B sent 2.5 million Floridians scrambling for higher ground. County emergency managers delivered instructions by text alert, radio, and neighborhood loudspeakers, leaving little room for confusion. In Pinellas and Hillsborough, sheriff's deputies moved door to door, urging residents to pack essentials and get on the road before the window closed. The state's evacuation plan, rehearsed every spring but rarely tested at this scale, swung into action as the Florida Department of Transportation flipped the switch on contraflow. Every lane of Interstate 75 pointed north, turning the highway into a one-way artery out of danger. By noon, the interstate gridlocked from Tampa to Gainesville. Families in packed SUVs, buses full of seniors from mobile home parks, and ambulances transferring hospital patients all crawled north at a crawl. Traffic cameras showed a sea of red taillights stretching for miles. Some drivers reported moving less than 5 miles in 3 hours. Gas stations along the route ran dry, stranding motorists on the shoulder and forcing county emergency teams to deliver fuel by tanker. In Manatee and Sarasota, evacuation buses queued at schools and churches, loading up those without cars. Social media feeds filled with pleas for rides, updates on shelter openings, and warnings about road closures ahead. The scale of this movement was unprecedented for the region. Emergency operations centers in each county tracked evacuee counts in real time, adjusting shelter capacity and dispatching more buses where needed. Pinellas County's EOC logged more than 200,000 departures in a single afternoon. In Hillsborough, officials coordinated with the state to keep contraflow lanes clear for first responders and supply trucks. The pressure mounted as every hour brought Melissa's winds closer. Maps displayed on local news stations traced the evacuation routes in bold red lines, highlighting the main arteries and alternate back roads. Officials warned that bridges to the barrier islands would close well before winds reached dangerous speeds, cutting off escape for anyone who waited too long. The Sunshine Skyway, vital for connecting St. Petersburg to the mainland, was scheduled to shut down once sustained winds hit 40 miles per hour. For many, the decision to leave was not a simple one. Some residents with limited mobility relied on county-coordinated paratransit, while others waited for family or neighbors to help them pack up and move. Across the region, the urgency was palpable. Everywhere, the message was the same. Get out now before the roads became impassable. The mass departure unfolded with a sense of anxious order. The entire region in motion. All eyes fixed on the shrinking gap between Melissa's approach and the last safe exit. Gas stations along the main evacuation corridors emptied out by early afternoon. Drivers who had waited in line for hours found pumps dry from Tampa all the way to Ocala. In some places, handwritten signs read, "No gas until further notice." Emergency fuel tankers tried to reach the worst bottlenecks, but with gridlock stretching for miles, many cars stalled on the shoulders, families sitting in overheated vehicles, cell phones dying, watching the clock and the sky. Hotels from Tallahassee to Atlanta filled to capacity by midday. Online booking sites crashed under the surge of desperate travelers. Front desk clerks fielded hundreds of calls an hour, turning away evacuees who had driven for 6 or 8 hours only to find every room already taken. Reports surfaced of families sleeping in their cars in parking lots, while others paid triple the usual rate for a last-minute motel room 200 miles from home. Supply shortages hit retail stores just as hard. At hardware chains, the plywood aisle was stripped bare within 24 hours of the first evacuation order. Store managers reported that pallets of bottled water, batteries, and flashlights disappeared before dawn. Generators sold out in minutes, with waiting lists growing by the hour. By the time most residents reached the checkout line, the shelves were empty. Some shoppers argued in parking lots over the last 5-gallon gas cans or duct tape, while others shared tips on where to find supplies still in stock. A woman's voice crackled through a local radio call-in show. "We left Clearwater at sunrise. We've been on I-75 for 7 hours and just ran out of gas. There's no help, no gas, nowhere to go. My kids are scared. What are we supposed to do now?" Her words echoed the anxiety growing across the state as infrastructure buckled under the weight of so many people on the move. Inside the evacuation zones, those who stayed behind watched the chaos unfold and weighed their options. For some, the thought of getting stranded on the highway or running out of money for a hotel room was enough to keep them at home, despite the warnings. Others, especially the elderly and those with disabilities, faced impossible choices as public transportation filled up and shelters reached capacity. The breakdown of everyday systems, fuel, shelter, basic supplies, added a new layer of danger to an already life-threatening storm. With each passing hour, the risks multiplied, not just from the hurricane itself, but from the collapse of the support networks people counted on to get out safely. The storm wasn't even at the coast, and yet for many, the disaster had already begun. In the heart of Pinellas County, the Twin Palms Mobile Home Park sits just 3 feet above sea level. Rows of aluminum-sided homes, many built decades before modern codes, line narrow streets shaded by palm trees. On a typical day, these structures offer affordable housing for seniors, young families, and workers priced out of the coastal condo boom. But as Hurricane Melissa barrels toward the Gulf Coast, the very features that make these homes accessible now put thousands at risk. County engineering reports have long flagged mobile homes as the most vulnerable structures in a major hurricane. Even with tie-downs and reinforced skirting, most units can't withstand sustained winds above 90 miles per hour. Melissa's projected 140 miles per hour winds, coupled with a storm surge forecast of 15 to 20 feet, threaten to flatten entire parks and sweep away anything not anchored to concrete. Emergency managers estimate that in Pinellas alone, more than 120,000 residents live in mobile homes, many in Evacuation Zone A, directly in the path of the worst surge. A resident's voice, shaky over a scratchy radio call, captures the anxiety. "We don't got a car. They said a bus is coming, but my mom is sick. How will she get out? County logs show that nearly 1 in 5 residents at Twin Palms couldn't secure a spot on the first wave of evacuation buses. Social media threads fill with neighbors sharing rides, posting updates on who still needs help, and coordinating with park staff scrambling to track who remains. For those with disabilities or chronic health conditions, the challenge is even greater. Hospital administrators across Tampa Bay, faced with forecasts of ground floor flooding, begin moving critical patients inland. Tampa General and all Children's activate protocols to transfer ICU and neonatal units, relying on a network of ambulances and backup generators staged at safer facilities. As the storm's arrival draws closer, the sense of fragility intensifies. Power companies warn that outages could last weeks, especially in areas with above-ground lines and limited access for repair crews. Bridges connecting barrier islands to the mainland are scheduled to close as soon as winds reach 40 miles per hour, cutting off escape routes for anyone left behind. In mobile home parks and low-lying neighborhoods, every hour counts. The physical risk is not abstract. It's measured in the distance from the water, the year a home was built, and the ability of a family to get out before the first band of hurricane-force winds arrives. Duke Energy's outage forecast arrived at the state EOC just as the first feeder bands from Hurricane Melissa began sweeping the Gulf Coast. Their models showed a worst-case scenario. 500,000 customers across Tampa Bay could lose power for at least a week, with some coastal neighborhoods facing blackouts that might last a month or more. In Pinellas and Manatee counties, where overhead lines snake through densely packed streets, even moderate winds had brought down transformers in past storms. Now, with 140-mile-per-hour gusts on the way, the grid's fragility was no longer hypothetical. Utility crews from as far as Ohio and Texas staged in parking lots north of the surge zone, ready to roll out once the winds dropped below 30 miles per hour. But restoration would be slow. Downed lines, impassable roads, and flooded substations meant that for many, the wait for electricity would stretch into weeks. Duke's spokesperson, in a live briefing, urged residents to prepare for an extended outage. "We have more than 5,000 line workers and tree crews pre-positioned, but with this kind of damage, it's not going to be quick. If you rely on power for medical equipment or work, make alternate plans now." At the same time, the Florida Department of Transportation confirmed that the Sunshine Skyway Bridge would close as soon as winds reached 40 miles per hour. The Skyway, an iconic span linking St. Petersburg to the southern counties, is the region's main artery for commuters, emergency vehicles, and supply convoys. Closure meant total isolation for barrier islands and parts of southern Pinellas, cutting off escape routes and delaying rescue operations until long after the storm passed. FDOT's bridge closure protocol left no margin for error. The last cars would be escorted off just minutes before the gates locked. Other major bridges, Gandy, Howard Franklin, Courtney Campbell, were set to close in sequence as wind speeds climbed. For anyone still in evacuation zones, the window for safe passage was vanishing. Emergency managers warned that once the bridges shut, no one would be able to get in or out until crews finished post-storm inspections, and any structural damage or flooding could keep them closed for days. As the storm's arrival drew closer, the combination of power loss and bridge lockdowns threatened to turn entire neighborhoods into islands, physically cut off, in the dark, and waiting for help that might not come quickly. The region's lifelines, both electrical and physical, were stretched to the breaking point. For hundreds of thousands, the reality was clear. Isolation wasn't just a risk, it was about to become a fact. Florida's property insurance market was already running hot before Hurricane Melissa appeared on the radar. Premiums climbed steadily over the past 3 years, reaching an average of $3,600 per year by the fall of 2025. For many homeowners, that number was more than a budget line. It was a breaking point. As insurers pulled out of the state, Citizens Property Insurance Corporation became the backstop, absorbing policy after policy until it was carrying nearly 769,000 active policies across Florida. That's more than double what the state-run insurer was designed to handle, and every new hurricane threat piles more risk onto its books. Inside Citizens' Tallahassee headquarters, actuarial memos circulated with worst-case estimates. A direct hit from a storm like Melissa could trigger tens of billions in claims, far beyond what the company's reserves and reinsurance contracts could cover. Reinsurance, the safety net that allows insurers to pay out after disasters, had stabilized in 2025, with rate increases mostly capped below 10%. But the memory of 40% hikes just 2 years earlier still haunted every board meeting. Executives worried that if Melissa delivered catastrophic losses, global reinsurers might walk away or demand steep new premiums, pushing Florida's insurance market back to the brink. A citizen spokesperson speaking to local news didn't sugarcoat the risk. "We have enough capital for a moderate event, but a direct strike on Tampa Bay could force us to levy surcharges on every property owner in the state. Our ability to pay depends on the size of the disaster and the willingness of global reinsurers to stay in the market." With hundreds of thousands relying on Citizens for hurricane coverage and private carriers wary of new policies, the system was stretched thin. Every new advisory on Melissa threatened to redraw the lines between solvency and collapse. And for homeowners, the next premium notice could be the difference between rebuilding and walking away. As Hurricane Melissa's projected track locked onto Tampa Bay, the economic fallout began even before the first raindrop. By midday, real estate platforms like Zillow and Redfin reported a surge in listings quietly disappearing from the market. Hundreds of homes in Pinellas, Hillsborough, and Sarasota counties were suddenly marked as withdrawn or temporarily off-market. Agents scrambled to reassure sellers, but buyers vanished overnight, fearing not just the storm, but what would come after. Pending sales collapsed in hours, and brokers fielded panicked calls from clients desperate to close deals before the hurricane's impact zone became a national headline. The numbers tell the story. In the 48 hours after Melissa's cone shifted over Tampa Bay, local analysts tracked a 60% drop in new contracts and a flood of cancellations. Luxury properties, condos on Harbor Island, waterfront estates in Bradenton became unsellable at any price. Economists at the University of Florida modeled a $300 to $400 billion economic impact, warning that Florida's GDP could shrink by as much as 8% in the next quarter. Job losses, they projected, would range from 300,000 to 500,000 as construction sites, tourism operators, and small businesses braced for weeks or months of disruption. Zillow's lead housing economist described the market as frozen in place, with sellers pulling listings and buyers fleeing to safer states. A Katrina recovery scholar drew a stark comparison. After the levees broke in New Orleans, property values cratered, tax revenues collapsed, and population loss became permanent. The lesson, he said, is that recovery is never just about rebuilding walls. It's about whether people and capital will ever return. For Florida, Melissa's threat is not just a storm, but the beginning of a long, uncertain economic reckoning. Evacuation routes remain open for now, but officials warn that time is running out. Anyone in a mandatory evacuation zone should leave immediately, using designated highways and following contraflow signs. For those without transportation, county hotlines are staffed around the clock. Pinellas residents can call 727-464-4333, Hillsborough 813-272-5900, and Sarasota 941-861-5000. Shelters accepting evacuees are listed on county emergency websites with priority given to families, the elderly, and those with medical needs. Pets are allowed at select locations, but proof of vaccination may be required. Insurance claims require careful documentation. Homeowners should photograph property inside and out before the storm hits, save receipts for emergency repairs, and store policy numbers in a waterproof bag. The Florida Department of Financial Services has opened a disaster claims helpline at 1-877-693-5236. Filing deadlines can be tight, so start the process as soon as it's safe to return. FEMA assistance may be available for uninsured losses. Register online or by calling 1-800-621-3362. Long-term, the state faces hard choices. Insurance reform is on the table in Tallahassee, with proposals for a public reinsurance backstop, stricter building codes, and buyouts for the most flood-prone properties. Lawmakers are weighing new grants for retrofitting older homes, funding for elevated construction, and incentives for relocating out of high-risk zones. Citizens' property insurance is under review, with calls to cap premium surcharges and guarantee faster payouts after disasters. Federal disaster aid, infrastructure upgrades, and transparent rebuilding standards are all under discussion as Florida braces for a future of stronger, more frequent storms. For now, the immediate checklist is clear. Evacuate if ordered, document your property, review your insurance, and stay tuned to official updates. The next 48 hours will test every system, personal, local, and statewide. Preparation and action are the only defenses left. As of today, Hurricane Melissa's wind field stretches 80 miles from its center, with storm surge forecasts predicting up to 20 feet in the Tampa Bay region. The National Hurricane Center confirms Melissa strengthened from a tropical storm to a Category 4 in just 36 hours, an intensification that took experts by surprise. Tampa Bay now faces the gravest hurricane threat since 1921, with a population increase from under 10,000 then to 3.2 million now, and over $3 trillion in property value at stake. Mandatory evacuations cover 2.5 million people, while insurance companies have already halted new policies and pulled back from the market. Yet key questions remain. How will Florida's insurance system absorb another $100 to $200 billion in losses? Will the region's housing market recover? Or will Hurricane Melissa mark a turning point in Florida's growth?